Hello, welcome to another episode of SaaS Scaled. I'm here with W. Curtis Preston at Druva. Um, he's the Chief Technology Evangelist, if I'm correct.
Yep.
Um, and could you please could you please tell us a little bit about yourself? And we would be very interested to know, how you decided to join Druva, and if there is any background that you can share with us, so we can better understand the context and the questions and answers that we are going to have in this great discussion.
Sure. I've been specializing in backup and recovery for coming up on 30 years and started out as a backup guy at a large bank, went into consulting, did a lot of going around to large companies, helping them to design and redesign their backup systems to be more efficient. Made a lot of money on, helping people just properly use tape. Now we've moved into sort of a post-tape world and now much more into a cloud world. And I was looking for the next step in my career, and I decided to join my first vendor. I guess the consulting companies were vendors, but a product, a company that actually produces a product. And I did see the SaaS way of doing things as the next frontier. At this time, at that time, it was a relatively new idea, doing both data centers and SaaS, backing up SaaS and backing up all these other things via a SaaS implementation versus a data center implementation. And Druva, at that time, we would have said that Druva was skating where the puck was going at that time. Now, in the last year, you've seen all of our major competitors trying to come out with a SaaS offering. So so we have to compete with them, where what we're finding is they're putting a SaaS label on something that we wouldn't consider SaaS. But that's something we can talk about later. But and so my role is to help explain the technology around what we do, right? I'm not so much as a raw Druva person as I am, I find myself explaining things like why using SaaS for data protection is a good idea, why you should be backing up certain things. Like I have a big argument, a constant argument with certain people in the SaaS community as to whether or not you need to back up your SaaS application. It just hurts my head to hear somebody say, "Oh, I don't need to back it up because it's SaaS," and so I think that answers your question.
Sure. And then, what about the company? Can you tell us a little bit about Druva and
Mm-hmm.
what they offer, and what is the main customers that they serve?
So we are data protection as a service, and we back up data centers, SaaS services, IaaS services like AWS, and then endpoints like laptops and mobile devices, all as a service. So all of your data is deduplicated, then encrypted, sent to us, and encrypted again when it's stored in the cloud. And you don't have to install any infrastructure in order to use our service. The certain larger companies, they do want a local cache, and you can put that in. We don't sell that. That's something you can do by yourself. And but basically the idea is that you should be able to, in just a few minutes, start backing up whatever it is that you want to back up. So the in terms of what customers we have,
Mhm.
it is really across the board. Basically, companies with data. The our service scales down very well and it scales up very well. So it is a true cloud SaaS offering. So it automatically scales up and down throughout the day to meet the needs of our current customer base. And so we can back up the smallest, mobile device, and we can back up many of the largest data centers, so multi-petabyte data centers, can be backed up even with the cloud using what we call source side deduplication. I'm happy to explain what that means. But basically, we can back up and restore pretty large environments. At some point, there's too much data and too little pipe. If we're talking data centers, if you've got a 20 petabyte data center and a T1 line, you're not going to be our target customer. But for every one of those, there are 1,000 other companies that we're perfect for.
Fantastic. So I have a couple of questions in different directions. So let me
Sure.
start with this one. The first question would be, from your perspective, SaaS companies now are serving customers, and in a way that maybe you mentioned that some of these SaaS services actually are not SaaS, but sometimes they are kind of they're marketing themselves as SaaS, but we
Yep.
are in that kind of process that we are getting to more native real SaaS, meaning that software as a service offering to customers. At the same time, you definitely know security, and I would like to ask you, for SaaS companies, what you think from security perspective is something that probably we should pay more attention to, that probably we are not paying enough attention today, or maybe even if you are paying attention, we need to pay more even attention, because that would be an increasing problem. And as a SaaS company and the kind of audience that this podcast has, I would like for them to really better understand the things that they should consider, attention, to put more attention there, and be careful about it.
Right. I would say that a SaaS services nightmare would be one of two things. Either a customer of theirs someone was able to successfully delete or encrypt their data and have it be unavailable for them, to access. So some of the things that need to be done are against protecting against that. And then the other would be if someone were able to access the data, exfiltrate the data, and then use that data to somehow extort the company, right? And by the way, that's the new trend. Now that the world has finally started having a decent backup and recovery response to ransomware, the companies are saying, "Well, fine, we'll exfiltrate the data and basically blackmail you instead of using just encryption." So I do think that. So we'll talk mainly about the first one, in the beginning here, in that, if you don't have, native MFA, right, multi-factor authentication, I do think that you should require MFA at this point. That and I do think you should have native MFA, but I also think you should integrate with more sophisticated MFA offerings and SSO offerings like Okta. Right. So the customers that want a higher level of security than what you're able to offer with your native solution can go get that from a company like Okta. And because they can do much more sophisticated things, like sort of noticing user patterns and noticing that a user appears to be logging in from a different country or a different state or a different something than where they typically log in. And so let's force an MFA token at that point. I think that basically you should not. I think you should force MFA at this point, meaning that every customer, every account should have MFA. And I do believe in something is better than nothing. So I would go for, if you're building a base MFA system, I would use an SMS-based system or the auth-based system. I would prefer the auth-based system, right? The one-time password method, where you use something like Google Authenticator. If you're building your own system, SMS plus that. SMS only if you're doing bare bones, but not using email as a third party. It's way too easy to hack that. But then integrate with Okta. Do not let your customers say, well, I don't want to use MFA. The problem is that customer, while that, I understand the concept of the customer is always right, but in this case, the customer is wrong, right? That customer who doesn't want to use MFA represents a significant risk to your company. Because a customer who pushes that they don't want to do MFA is a customer who is demonstrating to you that they don't care about security. And if they don't care about security, then they're also going to do other dumb things that will result in their account being compromised and your company's reputation being damaged. So I do think that you should force MFA. I do think, you should have native MFA, and then I do think you should integrate with a third-party company like Okta. And that gets you a lot of security brownie points, right? And the other thing that I think that you should consider doing is I'm gonna add to that first part is to, if you don't already have role-based administration, right? RBAC, we call it, role-based administration, implement that as quickly as possible. You do have sort of a cloud admin, but then that's the admin that doesn't do anything other than administrate other admins. And then you have these other admin accounts that have the lesser capabilities, and you do that to limit the blast radius of one of those accounts being compromised. Now there you will have to leave it up to the customer to properly use those techniques, but I think the more you can do that, the more you can do role-based administration. You allow your customer to have better and better security, right? That would be the stuff I would do, on the front end. And then just one additional in terms of the exfiltration risk is I would strongly consider you look into encryption of all data at rest, right? Using keys that the customer using the keys that the customer has access to, not you, right? If you're encrypting all data at rest, it minimizes, if not removes, the risk that a customer's account could be exfiltrated and then data from your company being used to blackmail them. That's just off the top of my head. Those are things like, if you're not, you can talk about whether or not you should encrypt the data, but everything else I said, if you're not doing MFA at this point, and you're not forcing decent passwords. By the way, this is a hobby horse. Please don't have in your password system, don't have these weird limitations of like the password can only be 16 characters or the password can only have these 7 special characters. I've never understood why companies have that. I use a password manager. That's another thing, is don't have, when people are putting their account into your to your user interface, make sure your user interface works with password managers. I know that sounds like a weird thing to bring up, but I'm a strong advocate of password managers. And you'd be surprised at the number of websites where it just doesn't work. And then there's sort of 3 levels. There's one that just works. There's one where the password manager won't be able to automatically put the password in there, and you have to manually copy and paste it in there. And then there's a 3rd level of badness, which is there's even ones where they don't allow you to paste a password into the password field, and you have to manually type it. And what you're doing there is you're sort of incentivizing the customer to have a much shorter password than they would normally have, right? Using a password manager. So anyway, I'll get off that hobby horse, but
no, that's a valid point. I'm using a password manager software, but you're right. Sometimes I go to some of these websites and they have some particular rules that the
Yeah.
randomly generated, highly,
They're like,
probably,
oh, you can't use an ampersand. You can't use an
yeah,
ampersand in your
they said,
password. And you're
no,
like,
it's not a valid password. So
you're killing me. You're killing me.
yeah, even though it seems like it's random enough and it's big enough and the length and nothing has a problem, but those rules sometimes can be tricky. But you're
Yeah.
absolutely
And have
right.
you seen them where they're like, oh, it can only be 12 digits or 16 digits or whatever, right? And you're like, hey, I'm trying to do a 25 character password here. Why
Yeah.
do you care, right? Anyway, like I
but
said,
but
it's a hobby
overall
horse
this
of
kind
mine.
of yeah but overall this password entry thing, to me it sounds like very yesterday, right? So I really don't know when, but I'm pretty sure that many smart people are really working hard to somehow make it secure but also simple, because it does not make sense to remember all of these passwords,
No,
and doesn't
no.
even look that safe either, honestly. As long as you're entering the password, there are ways to steal that password. Probably
Yeah.
most people write it down somewhere or put it because otherwise they will forget about it.
Right.
So there is a risk there. So I wonder when would be that time that there is a technology, a technique, a way, a method that says I'm secure and okay, the identity problem is solved.
It'll happen. It's not in my bailiwick. How's that? Right. The big problem is you can, so like, I know Apple is working on it, right?
Mhm.
So that'll work on Apple devices. Maybe it'll only work on iPhones. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that that's a big thing that they're working on. But then it's like, oh well, I also happen to have a Windows laptop. Well, yeah, you're screwed. So what am I
Mhm.
going to do then, right? So it really
Yeah.
has to be, again, SaaS, right? It has to be something that would, I don't know. I don't know. It's outside
Yeah.
of my bailiwick. I don't know
Yeah.
how to, I don't know, but I agree with you. I hope at some point, I don't know what the replacement is, some sort of biometric situation, but yeah,
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. I'm not an expert either, but I read that fortunately they are working together. So Microsoft and Apple and Amazon, and they are working together on a standard that all of them can support it. Because as you said, it doesn't work if it's just working on one platform and the other
Right,
platform has a
right.
different standard, or it doesn't work across platforms. So fortunately, the movement is there. The question is how fast we can get there. But yeah, entering password in general, I think it's just,
Yeah,
as soon as
it does stink. But having said, agreeing with what you're saying, MFA today, a
yeah,
password with MFA is as good as we're going to get
yeah,
today. And if your website doesn't yet support MFA, shame on you.
yeah,
That's all I'm going to say, right? And
yeah,
I'm amazed at the number of websites. In fact, I can think of one that is in the identity management world, right?
mm,
It's essentially a personal security product. I don't want to publicly shame them yet, just in case they have fixed it. But it was just a few months ago where I was looking at this pretty well known tool, and I found out, oh, holy crap, you don't have MFA. How do you not have MFA? Right?
mhm.
You're in the security business and you don't have MFA. Yeah. Anyway, so
Mm.
that's all I was trying to bring up. And yes, I agree with you. I hope that we get something better.
Yeah. And then the other thing you mentioned, you said you are amazed that some of these SaaS companies, when you explain to them, or you bring up the topic that you need to get a backup,
Mm-hmm.
for your SaaS application, from their perspective is, this is a SaaS, I'm running on AWS, I'm putting my, application on this. Why should I need to get a backup? Because probably AWS has it in multiple kind of servers and it's taken care of, and I have my source code somewhere else. Can you
Yeah,
expand a little bit upon that what is the need? Why do they?
I could expand on that for hours, but I'll give you so there's two answers to this question. One for the SaaS vendors
Yeah,
and one for the SaaS customers. Okay.
yeah,
For the SaaS vendors, which I think is your primary
yes,
audience, right? Is It is absolutely not backed up. Okay. If you're running in AWS, if you're running on EC2 and similar services, if you're storing data on S3,
Mm-hmm.
If you're storing data on EBS, that is absolutely not backed up in any definition of any backup that I would ever say, right? There's a concept in the backup world. It's called the 3-2-1 rule, which is just like, if you don't meet the 3-2-1 rule, you're just not a backup. Okay. Which is like 3 copies of the data on 2 different types of media, one of which is stored somewhere else. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you're storing all your data in S3, S3 is, by the way, a great service, or Azure Blob or GCP
Sure.
object, right? This isn't me bashing Amazon. If you're storing your data in object storage, it is replicated. Great, right? And it's checked for ongoing like data corruption, and they can automatically fix data corruption, all that stuff. Great. If someone hacks your account and deletes those objects, they're gone. Okay? They are so gone. If someone deletes your EBS volume, and in fact, EBS is worse, EC2 is worse. Why? Because it's literally just replicating a VM in your data center. That's all it is. It's if you delete that VM, if you delete that EBS volume, if there's a fire in the data center where that EBS volume resides, it's not, unlike S3, it's not replicated to 3 locations. It's in one location. So if you're not backing up the EC2 systems and the EBS volumes connected to those systems, it's you're waiting for something bad to happen. Okay. At least with S3, you've got it replicated to 3 locations. If one of those locations goes bad, then you could like, so for example, if one availability zone is caught in a fire or a flood or something, the other 2 availability zones could take over. That's S3. EBS, the block storage, it doesn't have that, right? The good news is, in the case of EBS, actually in the case of all 3 of the major cloud vendors, they all spell this out pretty straightforward of what's backed up, how it's backed up, if it's backed up. So for example, RDS in AWS. RDS is automatically backed up for you. If you have stuff in RDS, it is automatically backed up to snapshots that are stored in S3. But those snapshots are stored in your account. So if someone hacks and deletes your account, again, it goes bye-bye, right? So if you're running in a cloud vendor, and most likely you are, if you're a true SaaS company, you're probably running in some kind of cloud vendor, then, and you're not actively making a backup of your stuff, it is not happening, right? And you are at a massive risk. And I'll just give you, and if you haven't, here's the boogeyman story, and it happened. There was a company, was a SaaS service called Code Spaces. You can Google it, one word, codespaces.com. They were in AWS. They did not have MFA enabled, on their own management account. Someone compromised their main administrator account, said, give me $1 million, I'm going to delete your company. They didn't. The hacker did. And like that, the company ceased to exist. Why? They made backups. They used EBS snapshots to make backups. All those snapshots stored in the same account, right? So when you look at the 3-2-1 rule in the cloud world, you have to make sure that the data is copied outside of your account and outside of the region, right? You do cross-account, cross-region backups. It's possible to do that with most, like with AWS backup, it's possible to do these things. It's just hard. This is why Druva, for example, offers a service that automates all of that. And just to make it easy to do cross-account, cross-region backups, to make sure. We also now offer bringing that into Druva's account, so instead of having to have you manage another account. So if you're running in the cloud and you're like, oh, well, I'm in AWS, then I'm good, right? That's the 21st century equivalent of, well, I have RAID, and so I don't need backup. Okay. You don't even have RAID. If you're a SaaS vendor and your IT, the person running your IT infrastructure is saying, oh, we don't need to worry about backup because we're in AWS, they're 100% wrong. Point in this podcast and I'll tell them why they're wrong. So, and then just a brief word to the SaaS customers, and also to the SaaS vendors. Be upfront with your customers about what your company offers from a backup and recovery perspective for their data, right? So everything I've said up to this point was about backing up your data, your infrastructure, to make sure that your service stays functioning. Now let's talk about the customer data. There is something we call the shared responsibility model, right? They should be responsible for their data. It is okay. I'm okay with you offering a backup service. Just make sure that if you do offer a backup service, make sure that data is stored separately in a separate location, just like earlier, right? Make sure it's stored in a separate infrastructure, region, account, all of that kind of stuff. But be upfront with your customer about what they're protected against in the event of some sort of disaster, whether it's a natural disaster that takes out your data center or takes out the AWS region or the AWS availability zone in which you're running, or if it takes out, your infrastructure, right? Or if they get attacked by some sort of ransomware attack. Ransomware attacks are getting much more sophisticated, and they're specifically targeting accounts. They're actively getting SaaS user IDs and passwords. They're figuring out how to get around MFA. By the way, I love MFA. MFA is not perfect, right? I know of accounts where they hacked the email system and they were using email as their MFA. And so they got the username and password, and then they got the MFA and the email, and then they respond to the MFA. So they then had control over the account, right? This is not just script kiddies and just looking for standard vulnerabilities. They're actively targeting your accounts. And then if they get in there and they go and in your user interface, they look like your customer, and then they go and delete everything. What's the recourse in your product? Do you have anything natively built into your product? In Druva, for example, because we have to, even though we're a protection product, we have to protect against this stuff as well. So if we have multiple, configurations, we have settings so that for backup configurations, it's optional per backup configuration. You can say this backup cannot be deleted earlier than its retention period, no matter who you are, right? So even if you're the cloud admin, you can't delete this backup because you told us you didn't want that to happen, right? We also have a recycle bin so that when you basically, if somebody does come in and start deleting your world, deleting a bunch of backups, we will notice that. And we will notify you and say, hey, somebody's deleting thousands of backups. Is that what you meant to do? And you're like, oh, crap, no, not, right? So, so then you notice that, and then you can then bring them out of the recycle bin. I think we support 7 days for that. So what are you doing for your customers protecting their data? And then next to that is, what facilities, how friendly are you to companies like Druva that are trying to back up your customers' data, right? I'll say that unless you're in like the top 10 of the SaaS providers, right? So we're talking like 365, G Suite, Salesforce, I don't know who the next 4 or 5 are, but unless you're those named guys, you're probably not getting a lot of pings from companies like Druva, because there are thousands of SaaS products and we're not all trying to back up all of them, right? So the question is, what are you doing? How are you making it easier for your customers to get an off-site, off-account backup of your data? If you're building it natively, I would strongly suggest that what you do is use, again, a cloud provider. So, for example, I use my website, backupcentral.com, has been on this hosting provider called Liquid Web for years. I love them. I love their service. And one of the things that they use cPanel is the,
Mhm.
the virtual machine manager interface. And
Mhm.
cPanel has a backup configuration. Every day, it creates a backup of my entire account. It creates it into a zip file, and then it pops it over into my AWS backup bucket that I
Mhm.
have authenticated it to.
Mhm.
And I also, just for giggles, put one over in GCP as well. That if you created that for your customer, I would be so happy. And by the way, if
Mhm.
anybody who's listening has done that for their customers, I would love to hear about it. I'll bring you on my podcast to talk about that, because
Mhm.
generally what I find is the response from SaaS vendors when you start asking them about backup is like response number one, huh? Right? What backup? We're SaaS. We don't need, and then the second one is like, well, we don't need backup because we're SaaS. We back up, we back up stuff, or our customers are responsible for that. Okay, are you open about that?
Mhm.
Right? Because a lot of customers, there is this. This is really only. This isn't so much present. What do you call it? It's not so much present in the IaaS world, but in the SaaS world, it is this concept of like, well, I'm paying for a service, and they think that the service includes backup. Are you
Mhm.
being 100% upfront with your customers about that? And I can think, and I'll just give you two examples. Microsoft, horrible at this. They
Mhm.
obfuscate, 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 and there are Microsoft people who are, making money off the Microsoft world, openly advocating that you don't need to back up Microsoft 365. On the
Mhm.
opposite end, you have like Salesforce. It's like, guys, there isn't a backup, and we do have a service, right? So you be openly honest about that. Anyway, I know that was a really long answer, but it's such a huge question that you asked me. So
No, no, that's great. Great points made there. So hopefully that will be very helpful to many of these SaaS companies. And honestly, as you said, these things are not a problem until it happens. So
yeah,
when it happens, it's a huge problem. So definitely, people need to think about these way in advance and not just wait until things happen because it will happen at one point.
yeah, honesty, right? Being upfront about it, and then just giving your customers the ability to make a backup, making that easy, and making it easy for it to be automated. So, just give you an example of bad. Okay, bad is 365 without 365 offered no ability to back up. In fact, those of us that wanted to back up 365, we ended up using Outlook Web Access.
Hmm.
Basically, we would pretend to be a user browsing 365, and then we grabbed the messages. That's how companies like Druva first had the ability to back up 365. On the opposite end, you had Salesforce. You could create a zip file that you could download. You could do it once a day, once a week, but it was all manual. And then on the opposite end of that, again, is like the way Liquid Web works.
Hmm.
If you're curious, if hopefully I've activated something in your head, you can DM me. I accept all DMs at WC Preston on Twitter. If you want some advice on what to do for your customers from a backup and recovery perspective, love to talk to you. Anyway.
Fantastic. So probably we are another question and not super related to the questions I asked, but
Okay.
it's really relates to what you do as a kind of technology evangelist. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a general question regarding, you have been in this role, you have written book, you have been even working at some of these firms that essentially, if I'm correct, at one point you work with Tech Target that
Mm-hmm.
essentially you started even probably writing some of this content and technology related content and everything. So I wonder, based on all of the experience you have, if you wanted to provide advice to SaaS companies, which of them should really think about having a technology evangelist? Uh, and what kind of companies and SaaS companies would benefit most from such a role, such a person, because most of them may not have had this role at all, may not have
Right.
experienced
Right.
it, but you are on the other side and you can tell them, hey, I have been in different kind of parts of that, and I can see where this position might benefit SaaS companies best.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thinking about it, I would say sort of a couple of things. One is the more complicated your product is, right? Uh, the more you might need a technology evangelist. But then the other thing, the more easily. So you know how I said like I spend a big part of my time explaining not, hey, you should use Druva to back up your SaaS. I'm
Mhm.
just out there going, you should back up your SaaS, right? I spend a big portion of my time just having that argument, right? I spend a big portion of my time talking about what disaster recovery is, what, backup and recovery basics. And by doing that, basically it's sort of an indirect marketing mechanism for Druva. The fact that I'm on here explaining what I'm explaining, and obviously Druva name comes up, it's an indirect marketing thing. Are there topics in your space that are debatable that an expert can debate?
Yeah.
um, you know, can you be, because what you need to do to be a technology evangelist, you have to be able to talk around the product, not at the product. You have to be able to talk about. So I have a podcast. I do 52 episodes a year, right? I might do 50. I skip one every, I'll take a day off for like Labor Day or something, but for the most part, I do about, I do an episode every week. And you, if I was just talking about Druva and what Druva did, first off, nobody would care other than Druva customers. I don't want Druva customers. I want the rest of the world. So
Yeah.
you have to be able to talk around the topic, right? I talk about SaaS backups. I talk about, so the episode that goes live Monday is about Jira, right? Obviously a SaaS, Atlassian, the company.
Sure.
It's about a new product that's coming out that will help people back up Jira, not a Druva product, another company. You have to be able to do that. So the question is, do you have those types of topics,
Mhm.
or are you a very straightforward, I've got an idea for a SaaS service, like in my own personal time, something I'm thinking about doing, and it's the kind of thing where I have to explain this is not a kind of company that has existed before. I have to explain to you why you might want this thing, right? It's
Mhm.
something you've never had before. So why should it even exist, right? Do you have that kind of thing? Do you have this need to explain to people that they should be backing up SaaS? Do you have a misunderstood part of your product where, well, why would I go to the cloud? It seems like backing up to the cloud, I'm just using Druva as an example. Backing up to the cloud, well, doesn't that put all my backups on the other side of the internet? That seems wrong, right? Shouldn't
Mhm.
I have all my backups here in my hot little hands? Shouldn't I have
Mhm.
them on tape? Shouldn't I have them, blah, 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 blah? um, it's an extremely complicated world, and in a world that's full of confusion and misunderstandings, and some things that are actively being misinformed, sometimes from our competitors, and sometimes just like I said, like these folks in the Microsoft 365 world that are out there actively campaigning that you don't need to back up Microsoft 365. By the way, that's only present in the Microsoft 365 world, and I blame Microsoft for that. It's because they're not. I don't think, in fact, they are not. They are not upfront about what is and is not included in their product from a backup and recovery perspective.
Mhm.
And because that, it creates this void, and that void creates misinformation. So
Mhm.
if you've got that kind of stuff that needs to be argued, that needs to be explained, a person like me, uh, and then I would say, if you're going to do it, let them be as independent as possible, right?
Mhm.
obviously they need to be good at, like during this conversation, I brought up Druva half a dozen times, right?
Sure.
Obviously that's part of my job. You need to be good at sort of doing that and not just hammering, being a salesperson all the time. You need to be good at explaining things that are helpful to people, right? I try to be helpful to people and to explain, to help them make that argument, right? Like earlier in the thing we're talking about, you need to be backing up. I'm trying to help the IT guy or the IT woman that's at at a SaaS company, and they've been trying to get their company
Yeah.
to back up their SaaS offering, right? I'm trying to
Yeah.
help that person. I give them some ammo. Anyways,
And
I hope that helps.
yeah, absolutely. And then you're right. I mean, the best way to do marketing anyway is through education. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought that, the smart, maybe the future way of doing, not very traditional way of marketing, is not just advertisement. It's actually something that has a meaning, has something that adds value to the people who listen, and that way you are essentially doing the best marketing, because they are
Right.
more than happy to use that, rather than it's a very inefficient way of marketing that is just bombarding them with advertisement rather than adding any value to them. So
Exactly.
in a
And
way, yeah.
sorry to interrupt. And I
Mm,
would add, if you're looking for somebody, look for somebody that has an audience, right?
mm,
Not just that they know the technology, but they have an audience of people that listen to them or read them on a regular basis, right? They have a podcast, they have a website, they have a YouTube channel. They're a TikTok star. I don't know. I don't know what it is in your world.
exactly.
I am definitely not a TikTok star, but no one wants to see me dancing. But
No, that's a great point. That the audience is also great value added to a technology evangelist for technology companies, of course. Um, so I would like to ask you as well if you have any recommendation on any book that you have in mind that can create any positive impact for SaaS companies in particular, but also maybe for everyone. Maybe it's not even technical. Maybe it's just something that, in general, you think this is a must-read book that helps them in one way or the other.
so I'll give you one. So far, there's a couple of my favorite business books. They're from a few years ago, but the first is it's got quite the title: "How to Castrate a Bull." Okay, that is a business book, and it's from one of the founders of NetApp, and it is, I think, a great book on sort of building demand for product and building and listening to your customers and that sort of stuff. Another great one is Creativity Inc., which is the story of Pixar.
Mm,
And it's all about how to foster creativity in your company. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention my book, Modern Data Protection, right? So that came out in May of last year, and it's a good high level overview in a little bit under 400 pages. Not a huge book, and if you find the world of backup confusing, I think this helps to um, you know sort of minimize their, I don't know, not minimize the, but it helps to explain it in language I think that's easy to understand, and gives you an overview of the whole world, and find you areas where you can dig down a little bit.
okay, fantastic.
Oh, wait,
Um,
sorry.
sure,
I
sure.
forgot to, by the way, you can get it free. So if you go to druva.com/ebook, they're currently licensing that to download it for free. So,
Okay, fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you very much. It was a great discussion, and I think many of these points that you mentioned, at least for me, it was very educational. I learned a lot, and I hope it has been the case for other SaaS companies listening to you as well. Um, yeah, thank
it
you
was
for
fun.
joining.
As you can see, I'm passionate about the topic. So.
Fantastic. Okay, perfect.